Hello everyone, welcome to Studio Rags. Today we're going to do a beginner's batik. So here you see two designs, one is for the borders and the other is for the central portion of your scarf. The first step is that you should do the tracing. Remember, the fabric we always use for doing batik should always be a natural fabric. That means some cotton, linen or silk only. You cannot do batik on synthetic fabrics. So put your design underneath and lay the fabric flat, and just like I'm doing, trace the entire pattern onto your fabric with a lead pencil only. And you would notice that I am putting in only small lines instead of doing the round petals, because you don't really have to draw them all, just mark them where they're going to be. That's going to save your time, because when you're painting with the brush, the hot wax onto the fabric, it's going to change a little bit. So you don't have to draw the smaller details, just to put in the main design onto the fabric. The patterns that you have in hand, this is perfectly repeatable, so you should be able to repeat this design from all sides. The joints would connect very easily, whatever the length of your piece is. So that's how you would do the whole design, transfer the whole design via tracing. I always recommend to do a small trial before you go onto your main fabric or your main design. So from your fabric, you should cut out a small piece and put some area, draw some area of the design, and make it wax resist with your hot wax and brush. Here you see that I am doing the framing. There are several methods of painting with the hot wax. One method for beginners especially is very simple, that you can use these embroidery hoops. You can easily find them at your local stores, or you can use a photo frame and just stretch your fabric over the photo frame with the help of the clips. And the wax is hot, nice and hot. It's not fuming, it shouldn't be very hot. If the wax gets too hot, then you should switch off your hot plate or your gas stove, and slowly you can paint the whole design again with the wax with the help of the brush. Right now I'm using round brushes of number 2 and 4. It really depends upon the nature of your design, what brushes do you use, but they should always be natural fiber. And you see how I'm moving the frame. After this, I'm going to show you another method how you could do the wax painting or the resist thing in another way. You just notice that I have turned the frame over because I wanted to paint with the wax on the back side as well. Painting your fabric with the wax from both sides is important, especially if you want to have a very sharp design, because if you do not paint the fabric from both sides with the wax, then your fabric would not be resist 100%, and the design would be light or broken. Now this is another method that you can do if you do not have a frame, or you want to do it with the hand. I like to do it with my open hand. Just make a casual or relaxed hand cup and put the fabric over your hand, and slowly you can do the wax painting. Don't worry, there's fabric in between your hand and the wax. And besides, it cools down quite quickly unless you're working in really hot summers. So that's how you would paint the whole design with the wax. And later on you would notice that I have extended the petals onto the edges of the fabric, which I prefer to do because I wanted the borders to be more elaborated. Now I'm doing the center portion or the center pattern of the scarf, and it's the same method that I'm holding the fabric in my hand and painting the fabric bit by bit. So you would need to make sure that whatever portion of the design you want really crisp and really clear, you should paint that portion from both sides. Now this is another method to paint the wax on your fabric, is that you can either do it on a glass top table, which you can easily scrape off or clean later on, or you can use a plastic placemat just like I'm using underneath, and just put the fabric flat on it and paint the wax just like you would do painting otherwise. After you have fully wax painted your design on the entire fabric, then it would be the time to prepare the dye bath. Remember, never do the dyeing job without disposable gloves. There are several methods of dyeing, and there are several types of dye, but today we're only talking about the reactive dyes. And the reactive dyes have two components for the dyeing. One is the soda ash, which is going to fix the dye to the fabric, and the other one is the dye itself. To prepare the soda ash, what you need to do is 1 cup of soda ash to 1 gallon of hot water. Dissolve it properly. Water should be hot enough that you can touch it, not room temperature and not boiling. The dye powder should be dissolved in a small quantity of water at the normal room temperature. You just saw that I have folded this scarf into two halves. Both the borders are on one side and the middle portion is on the other side. And I'm going to sprinkle soda ash over it so that the entire portion is properly wet. And work out a little bit with your hands so you're sure that the entire fabric has received a sufficient amount of soda ash. Then leave it for about 20 to 30 minutes. Definitely, because you would want the soda ash to properly soak into the fabric. Now you can see that I have just gathered the border roughly, and I'm going to make 2 ties with a normal rubber band. That's just a style that I thought of for dyeing. You don't have to use a rubber band, but it's good that if you are doing it for the first time, you follow the same process. Now you can see that I'm putting the lighter colored dye onto almost the entire fabric, but especially in the central portion or the middle portion. And just work out a bit with your hands to ensure that the dye has reached all the portions. It's only mild rubbing to ensure. And now you would do the darker dye on the borders. I'm just sprinkling a little bit of the Chinese red, because this is a bright yellow and Chinese red that I'm going to use here. The sprinkle of the red on the middle portion is going to create tones of orange, and it's going to create a darker red border. Just work out with your hands to make sure the borders are also properly dyed. And after that, you need to just wrap them into a plastic bag. Keep the two portions separate. I mean, the light and the dark portions should be separated so that they don't, especially the lighter portion, doesn't get stained or overcolored with the darker portion. And then leave this for 24 hours nearly. In between, whenever you get time or whenever you remember, just flip the piece over so that the dye doesn't sit on one side. So I just rolled it into a plastic bag, and then I would put it into another plastic bag. I always, whenever I have to discard the shopping bags, I always like to tie a knot so that they don't litter the environment. So I would just suggest or request you guys the same. And in any case, we should be controlling the use of plastics and the disposable things, and try to reuse or recycle the materials that we have, because after all, we would want to have a green environment. So okay, after 24 hours, this is the show time, and you can see the pattern looks really nice and sweet. I'm I'm sure you would be liking it. Please remember that the dye color is going to be about 15 to 20% lighter than the wet image. Wash the fabric with just normal tap water until it runs clean, and then dry it. And after that, it's time to take the wax out. There are a couple of methods of taking the wax out. You could either boil it out by popping your piece into boiling water for a few minutes, and the entire wax would melt and just get out of the fabric, but I find that a bit messy. Or for smaller pieces, basically like this, you could even choose to do it with the iron. So what you would do is just have a couple of layers of the newspaper underneath, and have one newspaper over the fabric, and just do it with the hot iron. Or you could even choose to use the paper towels. Alright, so your piece is finished and ready for the show. I'm sure you would be loving it. So take a picture and don't forget to tag me on my socials. Happy Batik, see you again.